It started as an ordinary call for almoner repair, nothing that stood out. IWS. 60 years old, living alone in a peaceful, predictable life, untouched by desire for more years than I wanted toad mitt. But when Daniel walked through my door on that Wednesday afternoon, young, confident, and a little nervous, some of things inside me stirred. What seemed like an innocent encounter quickly escalated into something far more complicated. My pleasure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue bringing you more fascinating true stories like this one, and don't forget to watch this video till the end like the video, because the story is going to be incredibly interesting. Please hit the like button to show your support. What began as professional leadings began to shift with an undeniable tension as I crossed lines I didn't even know existed. The line between want and obsession blurred. I hadn't planned for any of this, but in awakened feelings I couldn't ignore anymore. For days I had been watching the lecking sink water slowly gathering in the basin. It had been a constant reminder of how little I had taken care of things around me. After years of working on my home, everything seemed pointless without someone to share it with. The house, once full of life, had grown too large. After my divorce, each room echoing with memories I'd returnate confront the kitchen, once a space full of love and warmth, had now fallen into quiet neglect. So when the sink finally became unbearable, I did what I hadn't done in years. I called for help. I found a local handyman, Daniel. His name didn't mean much, just someone to fix the issue. I was expecting an older, more seasoned man, maybe a little rough around the edges. Instead, I opened the door to find a young man in his 20s standing there holding a toolbox, wearing a gray shirt that hugged his muscular frame. His nervous smile didn't quite reach high size, but there was something above him that immediately caught my attention. "I'm here to take a look at the sink," said in a low but soft voice. I was startled, my heart unexpectedly skipping a beat. It was absurd, really, at my age. I wasn't supposed to feel sparks like that no more, yet there it was, a spark I hadn't felt in years. "Come in," I say, trying to shake it off and step aside. I watched him move around the house, his gaze sweeping over the kitchen as Hugh worked with quiet concentration. He knelt by the sink, hands moving expertly over the pipes. I stood there, pretending to keep myself busy, but my attention never left him. There was something magnetic about the way he worked, the strength in his arms and the focus on his face. I hadn't been this close to a young man in a long time, and I realized I hadn't even thought about what it might be like. Truntle. Now I couldn't explain it, but something inside me shifted. It wasn't just his looks. Daniel was undeniably handsome in that effortless, rugged way. Hat drew me in even more was the energy brought into the room. His vital light contrasted sharply with the quiet life I had become accustomed to. He exuded warmth in a way I hadn't felt in years. I caught myself leaning against the counter, watching him too closely. My Rob, which I had never thought of as seductive, now felt oddly revealing, and he quickly straightened it, trying to push thoughts away. He looked up, meeting my gaze. I saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes as his gaze lingered on me before returning to the sink. His cheeks flushed slightly, and I couldn't help but feel a thrill at his reaction. It was a simple, innocent moment, but I felt something stirring within me, something I hadn't let myself feel for a long time. I walked over to where he was kneeling, watching him as he worked. He was focused. There was a certain nervousness in the way his hands moved, as if he was aware of my presence. "Everything going okay down there?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. He nodded without looking up. "Yeah, just a small leak. Should fixed in a few minutes." Unable to resist, I lightly touched his shoulder. His body stiffened under my hand, and he felt a rush of power in knowing I had affected him. It was a feeling I hadn't had in years, and I wasn't ready to let it go. "You're really strong," I said, my voice taking on a teasing tone. He looked up, startled, his face flushing even more. "Thanks," he replied awkwardly. I gave him a soft, knowing smile, sensing the tension thickening between us. He shifted, trying to maintain professionalism, but Slight tremor in his hands as he tightened the final bolt told me everything. I stepped closer, watching him intently as he finished. "Need any help?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. Heck quickly shook his head, focusing on packing up his tools, but his hands were still shaking. I reached out again, letting my fingers brush against his arm, feeling the warmth of his skin under my touch. He froze, his body tense, and I could see the internal struggle and high sighs. Part of him wanted to give in. I could tell, but another part knew better, was young, and I should have known better too. But in that moment, it did matter. I let my hand linger on his arm, feeling the electric tension between Yush. Looked at me, his breath shallow, high sighs wide with uncertainty. I thought he might step closer, but instead he took a step back, breaking the spell. "Ma'am," he stammered, his voice shaky. "I'm just here to fix the sink." I smiled softly, amusedly. How flustered he was. "Are you Cereathers? Nothing else that needs fixing?" I asked, my voice playful. He looked unsure, caught between staying and leaving. His hands trembled as he finished packing guys' tools, and I could see the internal battle he was fighting. I stepped closer, me lips nearly touching his earthers. "Something else you could take care of for me?" I whispered, my voice lowered, inviting. He didn't respond, just stood frozen, his eyes wide. I leaned Ines, though I might kiss him, but he quickly stepped back, holding up his hands to stop me. "I can't," he said, shaking his head. "I really can't." A small pang of disappointment hit me, but I knew he wasn't going to give in just yet. He rushed out of the house, leaving me standing there alone, but the way he left it wasn't just awkward. It was unfinished. Donruss fell. And I knew that despite his work, it wasn't because he wasn't interested. It was because he didn't trust himself not to say yes. The days that followed were filled with a mix of excitement and frustration. Couldn't stop thinking about Daniel, the way he had hesitated, the way his gaze had lingered on me. It had been years since I had felt this way, since I had felt anything at all, and now there was this young man who stirred something in Sidim, something I thought I had lost forever. I didn't expect to see him again, and I assumed he wouldn't come back. Buddha, week later, my phone rang, and when I answered, it was Daniel. "Hi, this is Daniel, the plumber," he said. "I just want to check if everything is okay with the sink." Did the fix hold up? His voice was polite, professional, but I could sense of nervousness beneath it. "Funny. Oosh old ask." I said casually, "The sink is fine, but there's another issue in the bathroom. I was hoping you could take a look at it. It's probably nothing major. Booty feel better if a professional check it out." After a short pause, he agreed. "I can be there in about an hour." When he arrived, his nervousness was even more apparent. He tried to maintain his composure, but I could see the tension in his body. I led him upstairs to the bathroom, where the problem was a simple loose faucet handle, but I knew it was a neat faucet that brought him back as Hugh worked. I stood silently nearby, the tension thick between us. He was trying to stay focused, but could see he was more aware of me now, of the space Pete. Us finally, I couldn't hold back. "Daniel," I said softly, stepping closer. "Eve, been thinking about you." He paused, his hand gripping the faucet tighter, his breathing quickening just slightly. "Yeah." His voice was uncertain, as if he wasn't sure how to respond. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about last time," I continued, my voice low. "You seemed interested, but you held back. Why waste that?" He didn't answer at first, his hand still on the faucet, but I could see the struggle in his eyes. Finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wouldn't be right, would it?" I asked, stepping even closer, feeling the heat between us. "Who decides what's right or wrong?" "Daniel, you're a grown man, and I'm a grown woman. We both know there's some mything between us. You can feel it, can't you?" His eyes met mine, filled with conflict. He was fighting it, trying to maintain that professional distance, but tension was too much. It had built Tothas's point, and neither of us could hold back anymore. I placed my hand on his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath me fingertips. He tightened his grip on my arm, pulling me toward him, and before I knew it, his lips were on mine. It was nothing like the tentative kiss before this time it was urgent, filled with fluid. Of everything we had been holding back, his lips were warm and demanding. And I responded in kind, my hands dangling in his hair, pulling him closer. Passion was overwhelming the tension that had built between us unraveling. As we gave in to what we both had been holding back, we moved together, our bodies in sin the heat. Between yous consuming everything else, the bathroom seemed too small too. Confining for what was happening without breaking the kiss, Daniel lifted me effortlessly, carrying toward the bedroom. There was no hesitation now, no second-guessing wooer. Past that, the hours that followed were a blur of sensation and emotion off need. And connection denelk, touch waystander and demanding at once, his hands exploring, claiming me in ways I hadn't imagined in years. There was no shame, no guilt, just the rawness of what we were feeling. It was a connection so deep, so primal that nothing else mattered. In those moments, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in ages. When we finally lay together afterward, tangled in the sheetsy, couldn't help but smile. I felt more alive than I had in a long time. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was comforting. It was as if we had crossed a line we hadn't known existed, but neither of us regretted it. I've never done anything like this, Daniel murmured, his voice low and husky, as he lay beside me, his fingers traced lazy circles on me arm. Neither have I admitted softly, me own voice just as quiet. Daniel turned to face me, his expression soft, filled with something unexpected vulnerability. I shouldn't have done this, he said, shaking his head, but I don't regret it. I placed me hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath my fingers. Neither do I said gently. We lay there for a while, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The weight of what had happened need hung between us. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a shared understanding that had crossed a line, but we were both okay with it. Eventually, Daniel sat up, glancing at the clock. I should go, his voice filled with reluctance. You've been here longer than I planned. You didn't have to, I said, though I knew Heckle didn't stay. He hesitated for a moment, looking as if he wanted to stay, but then Harris shook his head. I don't want things to be awkward, he said softly. I don't want you to think I was just, Ismaila Dundersting. I don't. I reassured him. You're a good man, Daniel. We both needed this, and I'm glad it happened. But I'm not expecting anything more than this. He looked relieved, though there was still confusion in his eyes. So you're really okay with everything? No hard feelings or anything? I laugh, softly shaking my head. No. Daniel, no hard feelings. It was just one of Thosman's. No strings, no pressure. He nodded, taking in my words. Okay, he said after a pause. I guess I'll see you around, Mabe, I teased with a smile. If my sink breaks again, you'll be the first one. Eichel that made him smile, and he stood gathering tools and slinging his bag over his shoulder. But before he left, he turned to me one last time. Sophia Hest, his voice soft but sincere. I don't regret it. I just want you to know that I smiled, watching as he opened the door. Neither do I. And just like that, he was gone. The house felt impossibly quiet. He left, the silence pressing in and like a heavy weight. I stood still for a long time, staring at the door, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The thrill, the passion, the connection. It had all been real, but now it was over. I slowly made my way to the bedroom. The bed felt too large without me as I lay there. In the dark, you wondered if I had made a mistake. Had I let myself fall too far? Had I allowed Miss Faye to feel too much? But despite the sadness, I knew that I wouldn't change anything. What I had shared with Daniel ignited something in me I hadn't felt in years. It had reminded me that I was still capable of desire, of living off fashion. And for that I was thankful. The days that followed moved slowly, my lips returning to the same quiet routine, yet something had changed. Even though Daniel was gone, the spark he had rekindled inside me still flickered, refusing Toady. I found myself thinking about him often, wondering what he was doing, how he was feeling. I knew ending things had been the right choice for both of us, but that didn't make the longing go away. Stayed with me an ache, I couldn't shake an afternoon while going through old photo albums. I came across a picture of myself from years ago. I was young, vibrant, full of life. I stared at it, trying to reconcile that woman with woe I had become. I had spent so many years trying to be what everyone expected: a good wife, a good mother, a responsible adult. But in doing that, I lost parts of myself. Daniel had reminded of that part, the part that craved adventure, connection, and something more fun. Just routine, though our time tag there had ended. I felt a deep gratitude for the brief but intense connection we'd shared. He had given me a gift, a reminder that I was still a vestal, capable of feeling weeks. Turned into months, and the ache of missing Daniel faded. The longing still popped up occasionally, but it became less frequent. Slow, the emptiness inside me filled with something else. I knew a relationship had been a brief escape from my routine, a reminder of who I could be when I allowed myself to feel. I had changed. I could feel it in the way I moved through my days, in the way I interacted with the world. The loneliness that once filled my house didn't feel so suffocating anymore. I had found ways to reclaim my space, to make it mine again. I reconnected with old friends, joined a local book club, and took a painting, all things I had neglected before. I kept Daniel's memory tucked away in a quiet corner of my heart, not dwelling on it, not ignoring it either. It was part of my story, shaping the person I was becoming. One evening, months after Danya had left, I sat on the back porch sipping wine and watching the sunset. The sky was painted in soft shades of pink and gold, air crisp with the promise of autumn naws. I sat there. I realized that I was content, not just with the life I had built, but with the knowledge that I had lived. I had allowed myself to feel something real, even if it hadn't lasted. Daniel had come into my life unexpectedly. And just as unexpectedly, he had left, but the mark he left remained. Had reminded me that life didn't have to follow a set path, and sometimes the greatest experiences come from the most unlikely places. I took another sip of wine, a smile at my lips as I thought about the future. It was uncertain, of course, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I had rediscovered a part of myself that I thought was lost forever, and that was enough. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood up and made my way inside. The house felt warm, welcoming, no longer the cold, empty space it had once been. It was mine now, a reflection of who I was becoming. As I closed the door behind me, a quiet sense of hope filled me. Whatever came next, I knew I could face it. I had already faced the hardest part, letting go.